Hi, and welcome to this AI and C# video on the Microsoft Agent Framework. Today we're going to revisit the Chat History Provider. The Chat History Provider is the tool that can do roughly the same as OpenAI's left sidebar, where you have your old conversations that they store, where we can save them and rehydrate them. The reason why we are revisiting this topic is because it has changed quite a bit from the early previews when I made the video until the release candidate and soon to be general release. So we're just going to check. The source code has been updated for quite a while, but just so you better understand what the chat history works. So the idea in the pre-RC was that we could make something called a chat message store factory. That was a function that took in the context, and then we did some work, and this context had all kinds of state, so we could get a thread ID. And this is changed. It doesn't have this context anymore. We will see that in 1 second. And threads are now called sessions, minor change in the naming, but beyond that, they more or less work the same. But inside this message store, we had some add message, some serialize message, some get message. It was a bit difficult to understand, and this was very, very difficult to understand as well, this thread ID that we couldn't get. So it's a bit easier to understand now, so let's take a look. So in my sample, we just make a normal Azure OpenAI, and we are putting in a chat history provider. So it's not called a chat history message store anymore, it's called a provider. And as you can see, we're just giving a method or a class back now that has the inheritance from chat history provider. And the way it works now is whenever we make it, nothing special happens. Didn't do that before. And when we create the session, nothing special happens there. But the session has something called a state bag now. And you can see the state bag doesn't have anything right now in it. But when we ask the first question, who is Barack Obama, with the session, and I press F10, we hit our chat message up here. So instead of a thread ID, we have a session ID, and right now the session ID is null. So our path to wherever we store it, in my case, just local storage, temp message, temp folder in Windows. So I don't have anything in any storage at all. But what happens instead is we have two methods that we can override: a provide chat history and a store chat history. So provide, meaning whenever we start this, we can go in and give whatever store we have for that specific session. In our case, it's a completely new session, so we can see we have context from in here instead, and that context have a session, but that session is the one we saw with 0 data back, so we have nothing to show for. So in that state, we try to actually get the session ID, but because it's new, we doesn't get anything back, meaning that this try get value equals false, so we can't really resume any session here. And for that reason, we make a new session ID that we will essentially use for our storage, which in my case is just a quit. And then we set that into the state bag. And this is actually kind of interesting that you can do this, because now we're storing a session, but we could store any kind of thing on this state bag. We could store all kinds of value, user preferences, whatever we wanted to. So it can be used for all kinds of things, but in our case, we will just use it for an ID. So when we do this, we now can check if we have anything for this session. Of course we don't, because we just made it. So in our case, when we ask who is Barack Obama, and let me set a breakpoint here. It's now answering the question. But before we get back to writing out the response, it now calls our store chat history. And in that chat history, we have again a context where we have the agent, we have the session, and now we know that the session has a state back with one state being session ID, and it has a value way down. So we also in context get the request messages and the response messages. So the request messages was who was Barack Obama, and the response that we haven't shown to the user yet is here. So what we can do is we can take our request messages and our response messages and make them into a list of messages, meaning a conversation, user and assistant. And when we do that, we can just store it into our session. So essentially, we're just writing down messages, serializing them into the storage. So now I have a JSON file on my machine. We can grab this and have a look at it. We see, I think my Visual Studio Code opened it here. So we can see it just have what was in our chat message objects. So user content, who is Barack Obama, and so on and so forth. So just serialization. So now we can write back the answer to the user, and we can now serialize our session, meaning we want to save it somewhere. So if we do this, we can have our session with our state back, and we now have an object that also contains the session ID. So this is what we would store, which is essentially just the state back. We're not storing the messages. They are in the other JSON. But this one is the one we can say, here are your different sessions, meaning your sidebar in ChatGPT. We could give it a, in this case, we have a session ID, but we could also, for example, giving a summary, just like ChatGPT does. And then we would have those in a separate store. And when we choose one of these, which is what we simulate right now, is then we will rehydrate the entire message so it is in the agent. So some time passes and we want to restore the session. So we would have stored this, but right now it's just in memory, so we can deserialize it into a restored a JSON element, which we can then deserialize our session. So when we do that, we restore an agent session using deserialize. And that essentially just makes the state back come back with our session ID in our case. But again, there could be more in here. So when we do that and we ask the agent once again, how tall is he with the new restored thread? Again, imagine that between here, we would stop the code, we would rehydrate the message, so we wouldn't have this original session left. But if we do this, we again hit provide chat history. And in this case, our state back now have a session ID, so we will reuse that. We will now have a file, so that will read what we put into the file that we just looked at, and return that back as all the previous message that has been asked before, how tall is he? So if we set a breakpoint here and press F5, again, we will end up in the store chat history where we get the new messages. So we have the request messages, which is how tall is he? The request message will always only have the last one. And we will get the restore messages. So we now have the full set of things. So who's Barack Obama? And so on. So again, if we look at the request messages in context, we have only the new one. But in context of response messages, we have the new question back. But because we are adding to the range, because we already have those 2 messages in the beginning, we end up with 4 messages. And in our case, we will just store them again. So now my file that is my chat history contains 4 messages. And we get our response back where it knows how tall is he was referring to the old ones. Had we not put in the thread, it wouldn't have understood us. And it comes back with the answer. So that is how we use chat history providers now. It's a bit simpler because, again, we're just having a state back that we can control in full manner of what's in it. And that is the only thing we get back whenever we serialize. So we can work with the data based on that. So chat history provider has become easier once you understand the state bank. So that is actually everything. See you in the next one.